Hello and welcome to the lesson. Today we're going to learn about adding padding and margins to elements using two different CSS properties. The first is the margin property, which determines the outer space between an element and content around it. The second property is the padding property, which determines the inner space between the border of an element and content inside it. How exactly do they differ? These properties are based on the so-called box model. Here we have some content. The padding follows, then a border. Finally, we have the margin. It seems pretty simple, so let's test it on an example. I've opened a document in Notepad that contains a picture and an article about Times Square. The picture has the float property set to left. I don't really like how close the text is to the border of the picture. Let's move them further apart. First, we'll be using the margin property. I'll set the value to 20 pixels. When I refresh the browser, the text has moved 20 pixels away from the picture. Now I'll try to add some padding, which I'll set to 10 pixels. As we can see, the space became even larger after refreshing the page. To make things clearer, I'll add a border using the border property. I'll set the width to 2 pixels and make the border solid and gray, for example. The browser has displayed the border, and now we can see how the box model actually works. The inner space around the picture is the padding. Next, there is the border, followed by the margin. You may have noticed that the left margin and the top margin are different. This is caused by the padding of the body element. The body element, as well as any other element for that matter, has certain padding by default. This problem is usually solved by setting the margin and padding properties for all elements to 0 pixels. The values are then set for each element individually. That's what we're going to do here as well. As you can see, I'm using the star selector to target all elements. After that, I set both the margin and padding properties to 0 pixels. Refreshing the browser shows that the default padding and margin values have changed. Here's the picture as we originally wanted it. Notice that margin and padding in headings and paragraphs also disappeared. Let's specify these properties for the text as well. It would look better if the first heading started at the same level as the border of the picture. How do we do this? Let's try setting the same margin as the picture has, that is 20 pixels. The heading has moved, but so has the picture. I'll show you why. To make things clearer, I'll add a border. Just like I did with the picture, I'll use the border property. However, I'll make the border green this time. Now you can very clearly see how the property works. The green border is positioned 20 pixels beneath the top border of the browser. The picture has moved additional 20 pixels from the beginning of the heading. How will it look if I use the padding property instead? I'll try rewriting margin to padding inside the H1 selector. Now it's working. The beginning of the text is at the same level as the border around the picture because we changed the padding instead of the margin. However, sometimes we'll want to use 0 or other padding. Therefore, we'll have to use the margin property to align the picture and the text. I'll go back to my previous style sheet and change padding back to margin for the headings. Looking at the example, I can see that moving the picture 20 pixels to the top will be exactly what I need. Inside the CSS rule for the picture, I'll insert a new line on which I'll show you two new options. Inside the IMG element selector, I'll type margin top, a colon, and 0px. I'll refresh the browser, and as you can see, the borders have now become aligned. How did it happen? I'm sure that you noticed that I added the keyword top right after the margin property. For both the margin and padding properties, you can specify a different value for each side. This means that you can also specify the left, right, or bottom sides. Keep in mind that the property which is specified last carries the most weight. First, I specified a 20 pixels margin for each side. However, this setting didn't look very good at the top, so I removed the margin at the top by adding the top suffix and setting the value to 0px. It's important to keep in mind the order in which we specify the properties. If I added the lines in reversed order, it wouldn't work. This may seem a bit confusing, so I'll use an alternative syntax. I'll erase the margin top property and add 4 values to the property before it. These values are for the top, right, bottom, and left margin. I'll set the top margin to 0 pixels and all other margins to 20 pixels. As you can see, the effect is the same. Now let's set padding to paragraphs. Over here I want 5 pixels at the top and 10 pixels at the bottom. I'll start by writing margin top, a colon, and 5px on one line. Then I'll type margin bottom, a colon, and 10px on the next one. Of course, I could have also used the shorter syntax like I did with the IMG element, but I'd like to show you more methods of doing it. Displaying the result in a browser will show us that the paragraphs moved apart. I'd just like to point something out. Notice that the first paragraph has a larger margin than the second one. This is due to the margin that we've set for all H1 elements. This margin is set to 10 pixels. Whenever two neighboring elements differ in their margins, the larger margin will apply. Just like this, we can set a different margin for H2 headings as well. Finally, I'd like to let you know that with older versions of Internet Explorer, you may come across some minor problems. Older versions of Internet Explorer interpret the width of elements differently, as you can see in this picture. However, browsers like this are rarely used today, so we don't need to worry about it. That's all for today, and I look forward to seeing you the next time.